Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. It's that time of the season again. It's time for more narrative critique. You know the drill here. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments and leave them there specifically so that we can leave Bungie some constructive feedback. Before we begin, I wanted to talk about the fact that I already wrote a script for this video once, and the video even got made and completed and is actually sitting unlisted on the channel. I then decided it needed to be scrapped entirely, and I rewrote the damn thing, and I want to apologize right here, right now to Martin, who has to re-edit the damn thing.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my leg.
I had a script written, but with everything finished up in the seasonal story and everything that's gone on recently, it would seem tone-deaf to release everything that I'd said back then a month ago. I went ahead and took a month off from Destiny in the last few weeks of the season, and that was nice and refreshing, but as a result the entire state of the game changed, and a few different bits and pieces happened in the story, and again, dropping that old review now would look ridiculous, so here we are. Part of the reason why I remade this entire narrative critique is because I wanted to talk a little bit about the current wave of negativity across what seems to be the whole game. It may be a simple miscalculation to sit there and hand-wave this, because ultimately, when it comes down to Destiny, the third season of the year is almost always the slowest, and it's almost always the point at which people start to tune out of the game. Bungie is working on other stuff, and yeah, there's points at which it gets to a very low player count. Historically, this has been the case, and it has followed trend in more recent years. This, of course, has also been the case for seasons such as the Season of the Drifter, and the Season of the Worthy, and to an extent the Season of the Splicer, but narratively speaking that's not the case. However, now player numbers are lower than ever, and the negativity across social media, if you're pretty well tuned, is, well, oh my god, it's impossible to ignore. Before I say anything, I think a few things are true all at once, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm attacking one group in particular. I'll be completely honest, I think everybody kind of has a point. I firstly think that the PvP community are the ones making the most negative noise. That being said, they clearly have most reason to. Bungie's not really made enough progress to satiate the PvP community's desires, and it's telling to me that even I, the lore nerd who really does not care and does not do much Crucible nowadays, is sitting here and talking about how even I have heard of the core PvP community's hate of in-air accuracy changes. The fact that that's made it into my media diet in such a regular fashion is astounding because of, well, how much I see it. You want to hear my conversations about Destiny on Twitter? 80% of it is about PvP, and 80% of it is mad. It is furious. Now, there are recent PvP changes that got released, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. It's not something where I'm going to talk about the idea of a competitive playlist that's coming to Destiny at some point in the future. I'm not here to talk about the balancing changes that were announced in the TWAB. The reason why I'm even bringing all this up is because the negativity of the PvP community has, I think, started to become one of the biggest contributing factors to the overwhelming noise of negativity of the game on social media. And again, some of that is justified. But here's the knock-on effect. Normally, I would be okay to just completely ignore that PvP stuff, but it has changed the narrative around the entire game, and has created what I call a bit of an Ouroboros sort of, well, situation. Ouroboros is the idea of a snake eating its own tail, you know? Think of the idea of self-fulfilling prophecies, or simply the idea of if you say something enough it becomes true. This is kind of what happens with PvPers. This is what's the knock-on effect. You guys will voice your criticisms over and over again, and again, and again, and again. And granted, it's a game, it gets developed, sometimes changes come out, sometimes it takes hundreds of days before PvP maps get released. But regardless, the negative effect ends up being pessimism across the entire core spectrum of Destiny players, not just PvPers. You see, the slow, dissatisfactory progress of Crucible for years is something you can understand, but again, it leads to everybody having a negative sentiment about the game, and that player Ouroboros sets in, and more people start leaving. And ultimately, as more people start leaving, it exacerbates the problems of everybody who's been in that PvP crowd, and they just get worse. And it becomes this spiral all the way down, and it's a race to the bottom. Bungie has made moves recently to try and fix things, but the negative sentiment towards even these moves still exists. PvP players just don't have trust anymore, and the narrative around that has extended so much and so loudly that I think it has affected the entirety of the game, narrative side included. I am a lore nerd. I do not care about this stuff, but I am being forced to listen to it because the PvP crowd is just that vocal. Do they have a point? Absolutely. Have they been saying this for months? Absolutely. Has it had a negative knock-on effect, intentionally or not? Absolutely. So this is kind of why I'm bringing this up in the first place. Anything I say about the narrative at current, in hindsight, is going to look very much granularly focused at this particular moment in Destiny, where everyone is highly dissatisfied in the PvP crowd, and that has filtered through to the rest of the game. But again, I shouldn't even have to talk about this. This is meant to be narrative critique. Why did I rewrite this entire thing because of 6 minutes at the very beginning where I'm talking about PvP and the crowd there? Because you know what? It has affected everything. The whole game has been shadowed by this. I have not felt this negatively about Destiny in a long time, and I think it really helps contribute to burnout. I am so tired of being on social media and seeing something negative about the game yet again. So, yeah, that's kind of affected my enjoyment of it, and I'm sure it's actually kind of something that's across the whole spectrum. Yeah, PvP is not in a great place, we get it. That's certainly a valid argument, we also get that. We certainly want it to be better too. No one would want it to be worse. But is the entire spectrum of the game now being negatively affected by the noise coming from that side of it? Honestly, yeah. Yeah, I think it is. I don't want to assign blame here for all of this, because again, I think everybody's actually in the right here. Everyone wants the game to be better, it's just the way that we've allowed this discourse to infect ourselves. I feel as though there is so much passion in that PvP community and people don't necessarily know what to do with it or where to put it. And so social media becomes the outlet, it becomes the way of voicing frustration, and it becomes the way of saying, hey, we expect better. This, unfortunately, has had its knock-on effects. Is there anything we can really do about that? I don't know. Maybe it's just the natural progress of where Destiny is in its franchise. Maybe it's just the case that we have to sit here and endure this until an update comes along. Maybe it will be an important teachable moment in the future for Bungie. I don't know what any of this ends up being in the end. All I know is that right now, I'm kind of sick of it. I don't want to assign blame also because it's a whole barrel of flame bait for everyone involved. So yeah, let's not talk about this any further and let's just go ahead and say that no, not everyone is happy with the game right now, and that has indeed affected things, even though it hasn't truly touched them in a narrative sense. So, having digressed for 8.5 minutes, far too long, on this particular topic, how is the rest of the season trying to put all of that negativity aside? I took a month off. I haven't touched the game recently, except for the last week. I went ahead and rewatched the entirety of the campaign of this season before doing things, and I wanted to go ahead and think about how it really has performed. How is the narrative of this season doing? I watched through the narrative a second time, and yeah, my opinions are mostly unchanged, but I have to stress that this season was unfortunately far from perfect, and in a lot of ways, I felt like it's either entrenching into some bad practices or is taking some steps back. To clarify, a lot of what has always been consistently good about seasons, ever since the Season of the Chosen sort of revolutionized the Destiny narrative, it's all still there. The inter-character story and narrative moments are all really good. The voice acting, as usual, is stellar. The greater themes of the narrative and the depth of the story beats that it covers are excellent. But at the same time, same issues I touched on in previous seasons, namely the Season of the Haunted, have only become more entrenched. And that has led to significant problems. The narrative still has legs, but ever more it's being held down by a seasonal structure that delivers the story in an unimaginative and predictable framework. What does that framework look like? I'm pretty sure we can all name it to a T. Every week it breaks down into the following: go to the helm, talk to someone, do a seasonal activity, do a story mission, debrief. That's it. That's your weekly story. It delivers in 45 minutes to an hour if you're taking it slow. If you are competently rushing through everything, it can get done in like 30 minutes. This story structure can be really good at times, you know? It means that you can easily jump in, do your week's worth of Destiny, and then jump out at your leisure. It's actually really accessible in that sense. However, when it becomes same-ish and too similar every week, we have a problem. The lackluster structure here was only aided by the fact that the things that could mix it up, such as the end-of-season community event, left a lot to be desired, more on that later, and that the season itself seemed full of things that could have been amazing ideas, but they just weren't executed on. Now, I've said many a time that the seasonal model itself is good, and I stand by that statement because weekly stories that expand in scope not only feel better, but are more realistic in their scope of time. It makes sense for a story and emotions of a character that are being developed to develop over time, rather than going for a massive spectrum shift within the space of a few hours. Warmind did this and was laughable. Zavala had beef with Anna over the idea of using Rasputin that took all of ours to evaporate, along with any of his principles about how dangerous the Warmind was the moment that it helped us kill Zol. It could of course have been explored in depth, but it wasn't because we only had the space of 4 hours to allow it to develop. The villains of the expansion were a non-factor, with Nokris rolled out to pay lip service to the expansion's written lore, and with Zol being reduced from a worm god, a raid boss worthy enemy that has godlike power and might, to a piñata that we literally beat with a Warmind stick until candy fell from it in the form of loot. This could have all been a seasonal story. This could have been something that was delivered to us over the space of 8 weeks. We could have had multiple encounters with the worm god beyond the one that we simply did. Granted, we also had the moment in the cave, but we could have had all of that spaced out. We could have been hunting this thing across Mars, and we weren't. Seasonal, weekly methods of storytelling are better. They are more structured than what's currently going on. The story at current has a set pace at which it predictably runs, however, and that is not necessarily a problem when it comes down to the actual writing. It is, however, a problem when it comes to the fact that it's always looped into the same structure every week. It's something that's now so predictable that you can actually feel out the highs and lows of the season from the very start. Like, we now know that the major conflict of each season will drop with a cutscene, something that reveals interesting lore. The cutscene will be good, but we also know that the predictable high will be followed by a predictable low of each season, and that high will be flanked on either side by filler weeks with practically nothing going on, or things that just warm up to things happening. I mean, it literally happened. When we had the big Mithrax revelation, and the fact that Nezarec is involved in all of this, and it dropped in a cutscene, the week prior, the end result of all the story quest stuff was literally Mithrax telling us something along the lines of, "Be prepared for big things next week. I don't know what's going to happen, but something's going to happen." That is not good enough. That's the definition of filler. Again, this all runs in that predictable structure. We now know that the major conflict of each season will drop with that cutscene. We know that the highs and lows of each season will be flanked by the filler weeks. We know that when you look at the tail end of a season, we'll likely get a final mission or a seasonal event. We know. The structure here is predictable to the point where we can feel out what the narrative is going to be from week one. We desperately need to break this structure in half. We need to make weeks fresh and meaningful, or this is only going to become more entrenched and more boring and worse. Not every week needs to drop a narrative bombshell that blows the whole season off of the cliff. But the highlights of each week shouldn't also be a point at which Eramis called Ido on the radio. Or Mithrax is telling us, "Wait, just hold on for that juicy cutscene that you've been waiting for. It's next week, not this week, I'm sorry." Bungie has better writers. They have proved it. They worked hard to prove it. There are better ways to do the narrative than that. It felt like calling it in. And that makes me sad because you know what? I know the writing is better. I know the studio is capable of better. Above all else, this samey quest design that percolates through each week of the season needs to go. I am so tired of having my major revelations at the end of expeditions that have nothing to do with those major revelations. We discover the coordinates of the hideouts of each of the pirates in this season, for example, every week through expeditions and through treasure maps. Sure, maybe that makes some kind of narrative sense, but it Feels real canned when you do it over and over again every single week. Maybe something different each week? I don't know. Perhaps one week we're infiltrating the Red Legion base on Earth because they happen to have the coordinates tracked of pirates that stole from them just now. Maybe when invading the hideout that week, we see those same Cabal staging a counterattack. Maybe one of the weeks it's with Petra Venj, who has tasked one of her Tekkens with recovering those coordinates, and you need to dig that Tekkian out of a rough spot. I don't know. Something. Anything. Please. I'm begging. Just no more expeditions. I'm so tired of digging up coordinates from expeditions. It doesn't need to be particularly deep in every case, I just want something different every week that's going to feel meaningful, like a proper story, you know? I went and I did a random expedition with random dialogue and a random location to get to the place I needed to go each week is not good story. It isn't. And again, it doesn't have to be particularly deep. For all I care, you could do something different and say, hey, you need to buy the coordinates off of this one dreg from within your ship this week. Just go and find them. And then you need to go around and find the dreg. Make a fun goose chase out of it. I don't know. There are all sorts of interesting things you could do with it, but the loop that we have to do every single week, oh man, it ruins some of those highs. Break up this structure and let the narrative of each season take players on an adventure, not a delivery round with a side of farming and bullets. I've spoken a lot about structure thus far, and that's my biggest critique of the season by far, because it links into everything that is wrong with it. But there are other things that I think need to be talked about before we can talk some praise. Let's start with some of the big missed opportunities of the season. Here's the thing. We spend this season being pirates, right? I mean, that's everything that it's been shipped as, and you know what, in many regards they succeeded. It really does feel like a ship battle when you jump into Ketchcrash. I mean, you know, we see Ketchcrash going every week and we board the enemy ship and we have cannons firing and we face pirate-themed and named enemies. All that's good. But then we also see Spider's Ketch in Ketchcrash, and we see the Spider's Ketch in the background of expeditions. And yet, the social hub for this pirating adventure was not the ship. It was the Eliksni Quarter. I understand the virtue of trying to come back to this story and make the Eliksni feel like full-fledged citizens of the Lost City, but my god, what a missed opportunity. Everyone around the expansion says things like, let's be pirates, and calls you captains, and yet you're only ever on the ship that you are captain of for the first 90 seconds of Ketchcrash, and that's it. Really? That's all? You're going to tell me that we might have stepped on our ship maybe only the 8 times that we needed to in order to gather coordinates for the narrative thing and getting our expedition going every week, and as a result we only were able to spend, for some people, what I'm sure is about 12 minutes on our ship? That's... I mean, wow, that's a missed opportunity. Like, I know that technically it's not our Ketch, it's Spider's Ketch, but man, I cannot believe that was a missed opportunity that they actually let get through their fingers. It's not the narrative direction that the team went in, I grant, and there are merits to telling a story like the one they did, but I would have gladly given up the Eliksni Quarter as a social space if we could transplant every single one of its features and characters into Spider's Ketch. And while we're at it, throw the relics on there too. Your pirate ship literally has cursed treasure now. I don't want that thing in the frickin' helm. I don't care about the helm this season. I have my own pirate ship. And hey, throw a massive hoard of treasure and the atlas that we have in there too. Put it all on the ship. For the love of God, put it all on the ship. I would have loved everything on the ship. That would have been amazing. I can't help but feel like I would have loved to have seen them lean more into the pirate theme beyond just names and ships and a few bits and pieces, because it's not only something that could have been a ton of fun, but the seasonal lore entries note it's very much part of Eliksni culture, and we've known this for a long time. I mean, the original nickname for them in the back lore of Destiny was Spider Pirates. So yeah, the ship is a huge missed opportunity. I think that same missed opportunity is represented by the different summonable crewmates that you have throughout the season, but I think it's much more understandable why these characters didn't get as much polish. I personally would have loved to see them involved in story missions a bunch more. I would have loved to see their personalities fleshed out, and I would have been really pleased if they could have been voice acted, but I think it's fair to say that development time on seasons in particular is a lot more about triage, and lots of that stuff is completely infeasible. especially when it comes to voicing things. Don't even get me started on that. In fact, no, I will go on a little tangent. If you're voice acting every single one of those characters, ignore the Servitor because it doesn't need a voice. You have HAL 6 and the 3 Skiff Blades. You're looking at 4 new storylines and characters to consider, as well as 4 voice actors in each of the dozen or so languages that Destiny is published in. That's about 50 voice actors, and not even mentioning how much extra writing there is to consider where they fit, not only in this season but in the future of things. Lest we, the player base, forget that localization is not only difficult but also it's expensive, or that the writing of this stuff actually takes time because it's not all done in a vacuum. Yeah, the crewmates as a result do represent the same kind of missed opportunity, but that is a lot more forgivable, I think. I also have to say I wasn't a huge fan of the attempt that was made with each of the hideout bosses each week. It was good to have some variation gameplay-wise, but these bosses suffer from basically trying to be the Barons of Forsaken, but only having about 10% of their character. I still remember each of those boss fights to this day. I remember how terrifying it was to sit there and see Rexus Vaughn caging servitors and then just murdering them to pull out the ether. I still remember his fiery flail and all the terrifying nonsense that he could pull in a boss fight if you were doing that on the harder difficulties. I remember the chuckling and the crazed antics of Canix Two Fingers, the Mad Bomber, and how we literally blew up his hideout and had to get out at the end before everything blew up around us. I still remember picking up the engram bombs left behind by the Trickster, and I remember how goddamn creepy it was to walk into the lair of the Mindbender and then realize that it was a throne realm. Yeah, this is all great stuff. These were great bosses, they had great character, but Bungie was not able to replicate that with something that was not given enough time and flavor, and that's kind of what the hideout bosses are. I would have personally taken 3 really good and memorable story bosses and paced them out through the story rather than having 6 or 7 of them that were basically just a fight with what I'd call a British degree of flavor. That is, of course, to say not much at all. Seriously, if there had been only 3 infamous Pirate Lord lieutenants that Eramis had contracted, and we'd seen them interacting with her over the entire season, instead of just having 6 or 7 throwaway written characters that get 1 bit of lip service in the lore, I feel like that would have done a lot better. It also would have allowed us to vary things up, because you could have 1 week where you're hunting them in some kind of different method each time, and then intermittently you could actually go after them each week. Especially when it comes down to breaking down the structure and making it so that you then have your intermission with Eramis revealing the truth about Nezarec and Mithrax. Yeah, that would have been a really nice way to break up the structural monotony. And I grant, that's a lot more work, because making 3 characters that then have a lot of stuff going on with them narratively is trickier. It's really not easy. But again, it's something I wish could have been changed and something I wish could have been improved upon. But again, let's not forget about what I said earlier about localization. Some of this stuff just might not be feasible whatsoever, so I'm willing to give Bungie a free pass on this one too, frankly, because you know what? Yeah, I don't know how much it costs to pay voice actors when it comes to that level of professionalism. I don't know how much it costs with regards to the writers, and you know what? I don't know what it takes in dev time. I don't know how difficult all of that is. And frankly, this is yet again one of those instances where a player is asking for something and has no experience as a developer. Sorry, I'm sure there's a dev at Bungie somewhere who's been shaking their fist the whole time, and rightly so. Something that I really wish we could have changed entirely is the community event. This has already gotten a whole lot of flack from people, and I don't want to harp on about it because it's already been said, and developing these social spaces isn't easy, I'm sure. But that doesn't change the fact that the event was not a highlight of the season. There is a huge feeling of narrative dissonance, to say the least, when you see that 400 million Captain's coins that the community donated was just enough to pay for some bunting, like 7 or 8 old pews and a lectern. Look, seriously, there is a reason why I made a joke on Twitter about the spider embezzling money. For the larger message of Destiny, this should have been an uplifting event, where we know that now we've helped the Eliksni and turned their lives from those of refugees into those of other equal citizens of the lost city. This was an amazing, different turn in general narrative terms, but it was just not pulled off well, and so it really doesn't feel like there's a big impact to it. This could have been a really meaningful gesture, and it's really sad that it looks the way it does, and it isn't that impressive, and it really doesn't celebrate things. I can't help but feel like the things we did in a narrative sense were as cosmetic as they were in the real world video game sense. You know? It makes me feel like I had no impact at all, and that's really not what this event should have been about. It makes me even sadder to think that the better way to show the progress of the Eliksni Quarter might have just been to not show it at all outside of the cutscene. That is really not okay. Speaking of which, I loved the cutscene, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. The one thing I dislike about it actually is the way that it was used as a segue between the story of Osiris and Saint 14 and the story of the season and of us rebuilding the Eliksni Quarter. Those two stories do have some relevance to each other, as explained, but man, do they feel disconnected. Yeah, Saint is in the season and has got a lot of dialogue there, but he's really just kind of like a tacked-on part to it. The sudden revival of Osiris felt very much like a tacked-on thing as a result because of how it was linked into the seasonal community event. I think that Saint and Osiris honestly deserved better than that. Yeah, it technically makes a lot of sense, but I can't imagine that it would have been much better than to simply say that Eido studied the relics like she said she would and discovered a way to create Osiris's cure. Linking these two plot points of Osiris and Saint 14 and the rebuilding of the Eliksni Quarter together in this way only made them both feel lesser in terms of their plot relevance. And it really shouldn't, because these are both kind of important things. Just saying. So, that's about 30 minutes in, and there's a lot of criticism there. I guess you're wondering if I think the Season of the Plunder is all bad. And the answer to that, again, is that, yeah, it's not brilliant, but it's not bad. There are lots of things, actually, that you can expect from a Destiny narrative that are really good. Even with the persistent structural issues within the narrative, lots of the things that those structures contain are still good. So, talking about those generally, let's first talk about the reliquaries in the room. I guessed pretty early on what was happening with them. I theorized in week 1 or 2 that as time unfolded it would come to pass that these were of Nezarek's design, and honestly, as things went on, that was really cool to see, because it really felt like each week we were unmasking a mystery. That was an awesome sense, and it became clearer week by week, but the mystery and the suspense was always there, and it was tantalizing. Every week we got glimpses to the point where the whole mystery was truly unraveled. In the first few weeks of the season, you know, it was pretty awesome to see this going on. That's a testament to good writing. I also have to say that it's wonderful to finally get to know Eido in a story sense a whole lot better. She is a kind of linchpin character of the entire story of the Eliksni as a society. She really acts out and shows the Eliksni the future narrative direction for their entire species. So seeing more of her lore and her character this season, it wasn't just important, but also it was really great to see it. It was enjoyable to watch her not only sort of confront all the people in her life, but also to actually expand on her own knowledge. She is that kind of Liara Tassoni, Tali kind of character in Destiny terms. But you know what? We don't have one of those yet. And it's kind of brilliant in that sense, because she brings something that not a lot of Destiny characters who are immortal have. And that's kind of naivety. And that's not to say that she isn't intelligent, it's to say that she still has faith in the better angels of people. Something that, honestly, not a lot of people nowadays in Destiny do have. The only other example of someone who shows the belief in the better angels of people this season that I can think of immediately from the lore is Zavala, who argues for Spider staying in the tower and says, hey, we should allow him to stay here because eventually we have to believe that even he can be reformed. This is really good stuff when it comes to writing, because it's not just there for the sake of saying, oh, Eido is a naive child. It's there because she takes that emotion and challenges the conceptions that have left the Eliksni dredged in the place they are. She is the antidote to their cultural miasma. She is the thing that gets them out of their combative quagmire. And this is why she's such a refreshing character. It's something that's noted in the more complicated elements of the story, but eventually both Mithrax and Eramis acknowledged that Ido is realistically the future of the Eliksni. Her generation is the one that is sending the message about what they will be in the future. And in the end, some people will be a part of that, like Mithrax, after they have learned and continued to atone for their pasts. And some people like Eramis have accepted that they will never be a part of it. Those are really strong narrative themes, and it gives so much great reason as to why Ido is written in the way she is. It's why I'm so enthusiastic to see more of her in the future, because you know what? We don't have enough hopeful characters in Destiny's universe. There are so many points at which we're all dredged down in the darkness that it's really hard to keep our heads above water, but Ido is a breath of fresh air in this regard. So yeah, she's fantastic, and I cannot stop going on about how good her writing is, unless I stop myself here, which is what I'm going to go ahead and do. I want to also point out something important which Bungie has gotten right across the last few seasons, which is to create a sense of narrative consistency across those seasons. We've stayed firmly centered plot-wise on the greater war between the forces of the Witness and the forces of the city and its allies. In Witch Queen and the Season of the Risen, we saw the lines being drawn between the different alliances. We saw the emergence of the threat of the Disciples and saw the machinations of the Witness firsthand in the form of Rulk, and everything that he was trying to do in the Throne World. When it came to the Season of the Haunted, we saw another disciple, Callus, taking the spotlight. We further entrenched our alliance with the Cabal of Keitel's ascendancy, and got the first hints of a third disciple, Nezarec. We also saw how Callus's Cabal are now firmly serving the Witness's ends as well. Now, in the third season of the year, the Season of Plunder, we see the Witness empowering Eramis and placing her firmly on its side of the war as we entrench our alliance with the Eliksni of the House of Light. We would see that Eramis wasn't quite escalated to the stage of being one of the disciples of the Witness, one of its core allies, but she was going after Nezarec and the Reliquaries, and Nezarec is one of the key elements of the Witness's plans, clearly. This is something that is showing us even more important stuff narratively as we go forward. This is what focus looks like. We are firmly focused on the Witness, its moves, and our moves to counter it. The alliances that it is building and the alliances that we have built in return. This is what the entire narrative is staged around. We are firmly focused on preparing for the war that is to come. The narrative across these last 3 seasons has been laser focused on those themes, and now that we know what's going to be coming in season, well, I don't know the name of the season yet, but the season that will be coming in a few days, we know that it centers around the Warmind Rasputin and around Xivu Arath. Same focus. We build up our relationship with the Warmind again. Meanwhile, the Witness builds up its relationship with Xivu Arath. Both sides become more entrenched. The battle lines are now fully drawn. The only X factor in all of that now becomes the Lucent Hive, who are going to be a mysterious presence, I'm sure, next season, but we'll figure out a little bit more about that as time goes on. For every disciple that we face, we also gain an ally of our own, and that narrative focus has really helped to create a nice, linear, clear path to Lightfall that is easy for players to follow and allows people who have missed previous seasons to catch up on more easily. It doesn't feel disconnected, it all feels like it's part of the same narrative. This was a complaint that I remember I've had for years in Destiny. Previous seasons used to be really disconnected and didn't really have much more than thin, tangible threads to bridge the gap between the story of each 3-month period. This is something where now it all looks like it's cohesive and it's not only sticking to the same themes and plot points and drawing us along the same narrative thread, but also it's allowing us to still explore the diverse narrative themes that absolutely can come to light each season in Destiny. You know, no other game is going to allow us to explore haunting stories found on a ghost ship and then have a pirate adventure all in the same 2 seasons whilst still sticking on the narrative thread that we were on in the season prior to both of them, in the Witch Queen and the Season of the Risen. So yeah, they have done really well on that front. It's connective tissue that was lacking previously in Destiny, and whilst before we had something like the links between the Season of Dawn and the Season of the Worthy, or the Season of the Chosen and the Season of the Splicer. Now each individual season stands on its own, but links to the previous one and the one that will come after it, narratively. That is a good thing. Very well done. As a result, it's also much easier for people to follow the overall meta-narrative. Why are they the bad guys? Working with the Witness. Cool, got it. These guys, on the other hand, they're not fighting the Witness? Oh, they are fighting the Witness? They're the good guys? Cool, let's make friends with them. It's as simple as that. The cutscenes were also great, as per usual. Both the Nezarec and Osiris/Saint 14 ones really did deliver well. I do wish that the Saint 14 and Osiris cutscene had been a narrative mission or two, more akin to the Fellwinter's Lie bunker, where we got the Fellwinter's Lie again and saw the story of Fellwinter and Rasputin. It would have been nice to see it broken up into a moment where Mithrax actually makes the infusion, and then we go and rush with Saint to administer it to Osiris and watch him wake up. But the major narrative point of Osiris's return is displayed regardless. Also, as is, I hope, quite obvious, kudos to Bungie for actually showing a loving relationship between two men in Destiny's main storyline. Excellent work. The one wish I do have for the cutscenes, I think, is that we should try and protect them better from data mining and spoilers. I guessed the whole Nezarec thing within the first few weeks, but there are other channels out there who just straight up uploaded data mined cutscenes within the first few days of the season, and it spoiled it for entire audiences and the player base at large. That sucks. It sucks so much. The mystery of Nezarec would have been amazing if we'd just unearthed the entire thing all by ourselves, but we didn't get to, and I know a lot of people got spoiled. I managed to avoid it for a long time, and by that point in time it had become somewhat more obvious, but even then, it's just such a bummer. I don't know how easy that is to do, I don't know how feasible it is, but we've got to try and protect these larger cutscenes from being spoiled and data mined if at all possible. Overall, Season of the Plunder still has a lot of what makes Destiny's seasonal stories good, but the cracks that began to show in the Season of the Haunted have only deepened and gotten that much more pronounced. Course corrections take time on this front, so we probably are in for a third season of the samey structure that we've gotten before. But Bungie's narrative team have shown that they can take that feedback we've given and make it into real improvements in the game. Given time, I'm sure they'll learn the lessons of the Seasons of the Haunted and the Plunder. But should they fail to learn and act on those lessons in good time, I fear that the steady stagnation of the game via its structure will ultimately pull the story down until that samey structure drags it beneath the waves and no one cares anymore. If that does happen, then, well, shame on all of us, because you know what? There's great stuff still in Destiny's story, and I think that the monotony of the day-to-day activities that we've allowed ourselves to be surrounded by in it have just made us all forget that. But that's all from me for now. If you have your own thoughts and critique, leave them down below in the comments section. If you want more Destiny content, the new season is going out in a few days. It may be the, well, day after this releases, if my schedule is correct. So yeah, go ahead, hit subscribe if you want more Destiny content. We may even have a trailer coming out today. If that is the case, yeah, sorry, won't be able to cover that until tomorrow. All things considered though, I really do want to say thank you for sticking with me. Taking a month off and taking a break is a scary thing in video game terms, and I'm always glad to see that you guys stick around for it. But of course, as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Pur audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.